And now it's time for another Dice Tower review with Mike Vincent.
Hello, Michael Vincent here, and today we're going to be taking a look at a game called Freedom the Underground Railroad. So this will be an educational review, and it's worth mentioning that there are already several reviews of this game on the Dice Tower channel that will strictly look at it from a gameplay perspective. But as a history teacher, I'm very interested to take a look at Freedom the Underground Railroad, both because this game has been somewhat controversial, but also because there's been a lot of work put into this game to put a lot of history and information into this, and clearly part of the game, the reason this game was made was to educate. So in my opinion, this is a perfect game to take a look at. So let's jump in and we'll go through a few different categories, and then I'll give you my thoughts at the end. Okay, so Freedom the Underground Railroad is a game produced by Academy Games and was designed by Brian Mayer. So here you see the board, very nice board, and everything you need is pretty much seen here. It's nice in that you don't have a lot of extra components hanging around the outside and the periphery of the board, but everything is contained within. So the objective of the game is that you will choose a role, and depending on whether you're playing from 1 to 4 players, you will choose a different role. Each role is going to have different special abilities, and you're going to use those abilities to ultimately rescue slaves from the plantations in the southern United States, and you need to move them up through the US, and ultimately you want to get them to Canada where they're going to be rescued. So depending on whether how many players you have in the game, and whether you want to play the regular game or the more challenging game, this in the corner card, which can be removed, and there's different versions, is going to determine how you win. So for example, the 2-player game, we need to rescue 10 slaves, and if any more than 16 are captured or lost, then you lose the game. So that's your objective. But on the other side is a more challenging version. So for 2 players, if you want to be more challenging, then you need to free 13 slaves, and only 12 can be lost throughout the game. So that's ultimately what's going to determine what you're going to do. As your slaves move north, they will reach freedom in Canada, so you'll be moving them up, and you need to reach the required amount at the top. Now the other interesting thing about this is you're actually going to play through 3 chronological time periods. So in each set we start from 1800 to 1839, and you need to purchase these support tokens, and once you purchase all the support tokens, you can then move on to the next phase. So we start from 1800 to 1839, we will then move forward from 1840 to 1859, and finally the last phase of the game is from 1860 to 1865. In order to win the game, you have to have made it through all the support tokens, and ultimately once you remove the last one, and if you've met the required slaves required to win, then you win the game at the end of the round. Now, the only difference is between different rounds, you get these tokens. So conductor tokens will allow you to move slaves on the board. So for example, this one moves 3 slaves 1 spot. So I could go 1, 2, 3. Or I can use a fundraising token. And a fundraising token is going to allow me, in this instance, in the 1800 to 1839 spot, to raise money for each slave I have on a green colored backing. Now, these cards at the bottom are going to come out from this deck from 1800 to 1839, but as soon as I've moved from the 1840 to 1859, I will then be drawing from these cards. And these cards, some are good, some are bad, but you can use them to help you succeed in your objective. So 2 other important elements worth mentioning for this game is the slave market and the slave catchers. So the slave catchers, there's 5 different ones here represented by a different colored symbol, and every time you move a slave to a backing where there's a track for that slave catcher, so for example there's a brown square on this track, so that will move the brown slave catcher 1 city or 1 spot closer. So if you end up with a slave catcher on one of your spots with a slave, then that slave will be captured and returned to what we have as the slave market. So each turn on the slave market, at the end of the turn, any slaves on this card will end up being moved to the plantations. And so you always are under this pressure to be moving slaves off the plantations so that they can make room for more that will be there at the end of the turn. If you are not able to have enough spaces in the plantations, then you end up having these as slaves lost, which is ultimately going to make you lose the game if you have too many. So those are the other 2 important elements and mechanics that will play into your experience of Freedom the Underground Railroad. Okay, so now I'd like to take a brief look at the components, and I'm very impressed with the components of this game. The most significant component, of course, is the board. In my opinion, the board is beautiful, looks really good, very thematic. The style, the North Star, looks like a newspaper. We have everything on the board is very easy to follow. Sometimes with historical games, they can be a little bit intimidating to learn the rules, but I was able to get through the rule book really quickly, very easy. Almost all the information you need is actually on the board. So I know this conductor token, if I want to buy it, well, it says right on the board that it's $2. There's spots for the cards, so it's easily laid out. You know where to put everything. The board is very clear in terms of it tells you the order of play. It has slots on the board for everything that you need. Everything has colored symbols. Everything on the map is color coded. The time periods are color coded. So it just makes it really easy and accessible. So this is something I really appreciated about the game. So let's take a look at some of the other more smaller specific components. So in addition to the board being really high quality and really adds a lot to the game, all the specific components do as well, which is great. These objective cards, really thick cardstock, really nice and meaty. The tokens are also thick, and the printing on them is really clear. Everything's color coded, as I mentioned. The dice are good, so they have the different symbols. Again, very easy to follow. And these arrows delineating whether a slave catcher will go east or west. The colors are either filled in or empty, and that's on the board. So again, just really easy to follow. The cards are great. We have pictures for everything. There's flavor text at the very, very bottom, which talks about the history of each card. So you get these nice little bits of flavor text on each card, as well as everything has symbols. The text is bold, easy to read. And I also really like these player mats. So depending on the role that you choose, there's 6 different ones that come in this set of the game. The preacher, the conductor, the agent, the stockholder, the station master, and the shepherd. For each one, it's really accessible in that it tells you for each phase, has a slot for your roll card and your reserve card. And the other thing I really appreciated about this game is having a nice little easy insert, which made it really streamline just getting through the game. So for me, 2 thumbs up on the components. Okay, so arguably the most interesting part of this review for me is taking a look at the theme. So of course this game has garnered some controversy as the theme is very dark and is a very touchy subject as it's a very dark historical period. So as a history teacher, I think it's worth considering that at least Academy Games, though the subject matter is dark and obviously some people are going to be uncomfortable playing this game, but they clearly have taken education as their main reason for creating this game. Now, it is engaging, it is thought-provoking, so are you having fun at times? Yes, you are. Because the game is well designed, it is fun to overcome the achievements of what you need to do, and some people I think are uncomfortable with the idea of having fun while playing a game. And that's understandable. So I'd like to preface my overall opinion by saying if this theme is too dark for you and if you don't find you're comfortable playing this game, then don't play this game. I think everyone is entitled to that opinion, and if you don't feel that you are going to enjoy playing a game or you feel uncomfortable playing a game, then by all means you should not play it. But I do find that some people are accusing Academy Games of creating this game and saying that they shouldn't have done it. And I do, as a history teacher, appreciate having something like this that I can use to maybe enhance or help engage students who are learning about this time period. And I'd like to maybe draw a parallel between board gaming as a medium and film as a medium. I think it's fair to say that overwhelmingly films are made to entertain. Most movies, when they come out in theaters, whether it's about superheroes or it's a romantic comedy or it's a comedy or a drama, most of them are meant to ultimately be entertaining. But obviously some directors go out and they push the bounds of what film is supposed to do. There's documentary films, there's very serious films about dark historical subject matter. So for example, Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List obviously tackles very dark subject matter and is not necessarily meant to entertain, but it's meant to educate and it's meant to have a message. And I think what Academy Games is doing here is sort of pushing the boundaries of what we think about a board game should be. Is a board game strictly supposed to be about entertainment? Well, historically, most games are about having a good time, getting together with friends, and fun being the ultimate goal. But I think it's interesting that Academy Games is sort of pushing the boundaries and trying to experiment and see, well, can the medium of board games not just be about having fun, but can it be used to educate, and can it be used to make you empathize with a group of people that maybe you don't identify with? And can it, the whole point of this game is you are struggling to rescue slaves, you are trying to help them get their freedom, and it sort of puts you in that position, and you do feel like you are struggling, the game is challenging, and when that isn't happening for you, you're like, oh man, this is really tough. So are people going to have fun in terms of, is the game psychologically stimulating? Yes. And again, if you're not comfortable with that feeling, I get it. But on the other hand, I sort of applaud Academy Games for trying to push the boundaries of what the medium of board games does traditionally, and is really trying to create an immersive experience which has a message. I think the slavery as a topic in the Underground Railroad has been approached very respectfully here. In the rule book, it's important to note that they've given the whole history of the Underground Railroad and this time period. And so it's clear that when this game was made, they really wanted to make sure that the people who play it walk away learning something about the Underground Railroad. And so as a teacher, for me, if students will get engaged and they will walk away learning and appreciating this time period, then perhaps that's more important than whether they had fun doing it, because I feel that students are intelligent enough, and we as humans are probably intelligent enough to make that distinction. So again, if you're not comfortable with the theme, I totally get it, I respect that, and I can understand why someone would not want to play this game. But as an educational tool and as an experiment in trying to push board games beyond simply being entertaining and trying to make them educational, then I think they did a good job here. So that's my take on this, the whole controversy around this topic. And I would challenge people to think, how come we can make a film that has dark historical subject matter, and are films meant to be entertaining? Well, yes, but maybe board games don't necessarily have to just be about being fun. Maybe a board game can also be used to have a message and to educate. So there's my opinion on that one. Let's take a look at the educational value of this game. So one thing I really appreciate about Academy Games is it's clear they are trying to marry board gaming with history. And as a history teacher, I think it's very cool, a history teacher who's very passionate about board games, that there are actually games now that are being made specifically to teach the players about different periods of time and different historical events. So at the back of the book, there's a nice little write-up putting this board game into context. So if you don't know very much about the Underground Railroad, or you don't know very much about slavery in this time period, then this goes through the history, and you can read about the states movements, and it goes through and talks about the Underground Railroad, highlighting some of the important people like Frederick Douglass or Abraham Lincoln, and gives you that background. So right off the bat, just by reading the rules and before you play the game, and certainly if I was to use this in my classroom, I would make students read this part first. So it's very nice that anyone playing this game, regardless of what their background is in terms of history, is that they're going to have some context for why they're playing this game and what's going on. Now, every card in this game is also have a lot of historical value. So here we see Abraham Lincoln, we see Frederick Douglass, whose book I read in university, and they do give the history of each thing at the bottom in this flavor text. So whether it's about Henry Box Brown, who's actually a very fascinating figure, I tell students the story and they find it really interesting. He actually put himself in a box and shipped himself as a way of trying to escape slavery. So that's very interesting. So all the people, all the events, all the places that are on these cards are all real. They've all been researched, and they all represent the history of what the card is doing. And thematically, they've actually married what the historical event is and what the card actually does. So for Henry Box Brown, it says, move one slave from any plantation to a large northern city with no effect. So students in my class who know about Henry Box Brown, I think are going to find this really interesting, because A, they'll be able to identify and recognize the card, and B, they would probably be able to predict what this card would do before they even read it, because they know the history of Henry Box Brown and what he did. So I really appreciate that Academy Games has put lots of history into this game. So even if you don't read the contextual write-up at the back of the rule book, even on each card, and we see the different historical time periods. So students, if they play it enough times, are going to start to relate, well, we know Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass are associated with this time period from 1860 to 1865, whereas Henry Box Brown, well, that actually took place earlier, from 1840 to 1859. So students are going to get a sense of the chronology of these people and these events, and they're also going to walk away with a pretty good idea of who were some of the important figures, what were some of the important places, and ultimately just know more about the Underground Railroad. And as a history teacher, that's what I want. So I think it's worth mentioning as well, of course, anytime you have a map, students are going to have some geographic context. This isn't the most detailed map I've seen in a board game, but it is very good. Highlights all the different states. You have all of the Great Lakes, and they do have different cities, and it shows their relative geographic position. So as a little bit of geography, this game is also good. And I think it actually, because this game is controversial, makes for a very nice teachable moment and could actually really make for some also interesting debates and discussions you could have in your class. So for example, I like to do a lot of debates in my classes, so it might be very possible that I would try and structure a debate around, well, to what extent should dark historical topics like genocide or like slavery be represented in board games or be represented in films or media in general? So I think the fact that this game is also somewhat controversial also lends to its educational value, because students can discuss and debate, to what extent should a dark historical period, should we have games about these things? Should we have films about these things? This also applies to video games, which lots of students play. So I think this game could also be a good launching pad for some really interesting discussions about this. So that's another little bit of added educational value. And the game is also cooperative. So if you have students who sometimes don't play well with others, or they're really sore winners or losers, then maybe forcing them to work in a group and have to cooperate and overcome an objective could also serve some function that way as well. So there you have the educational value for So that concludes my look at Freedom the Underground Railroad. I think it's worth mentioning, and please, if you haven't watched my reviews before, these are educational reviews. I realize I did not take a look at every single rule and component in this game, but the point is just to give you an overview for teachers or parents. Is this game, does it have educational value, and is there something that my son or daughter or my students could learn? Or if you're a history buff, is this something I should check out? So I think Academy Games did a really good job of taking the history of this period and putting it into a board game, whether it's the historical context on the rule book or the flavor text on the cards, or using well-researched actual historical places and figures in the game. I think that is all excellent. Of course, the theme is somewhat controversial. I appreciate that. If you're not comfortable with this game, if you're not comfortable playing something that you feel is making light or making fun of something that is dark, I very much respect that opinion, and I see where you're coming from on that. But I think Academy Games did do a good job of trying to be respectful and try to really take a look at how can we make this game educational, and how can we take this historical time period and transfer it into a game. So for me, a really good game, really well done, and the only sticking point, I think, is the theme and whether you're comfortable with that or not. But otherwise, this game is fantastic. The components are great. It's very streamlined, and they've done a really good job of putting history in here as well. So great job from Academy Games. Thank you very much for watching, and look forward to some more educational reviews very soon.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.